talk is entitled The Age of Artificial Intelligence, Be Afraid, Be Very Afraid, or subtitled AI Makes Climate Change Look Like a Puppy. Great moral dilemma of our time indeed. I found it quite a challenge to convey in just how afraid you should be in just 10 minutes. So I decided to reduce the fascinating evolution of artificial intelligence, and I use the term evolution advisedly, to just 5 chapters based around 3 landmark experiments. And because we're short of time, I decided to just start in 428 BC. Now, many people are jumping on the bandwagon of artificial intelligence, or AI, as if it were a new phenomenon. In fact, AI dates back to at least classical Greek times, around 428 BC. And the Greeks were the first to consider that thinking might be a mechanisable process. There was a number of schools who worked on logics, what we now call logics, to mechanise thinking, the most famous of those being Aristotle's. But while the Greeks invented symbolic reasoning, it needed computers to fully automate the process. So I'm going to jump forward just about 2,500 years to my first experiment. And this is the development of the computer program called Logic Theorist. This was a program developed by Simon Newell and Shaw in 1955-56. Actually, this was just prior to the Dartmouth workshop in 56, at which John McCarthy coined the term artificial intelligence. And it was executed on one of the early computers, a computer called Joniac at Rand Corp. And this program managed to prove 38 theorems from the Principia Mathematica. So the Principia Mathematica, for those who don't know, was landmark mathematical text of the early 20th century, which, proved a lot of mathematics from first principles, including 1 + 1 = 2, actually. So, actually, on the right-hand side there are is a copy of some actual notes by Simon, trying to work out one of the proofs that had been produced by this automatic theorem prover, Logic Theorist. So Logic Theorist was a demonstration that symbolic reasoning could be automated. Or in other words, we can think of it as a proof that a machine could think. Significantly, the proof of one of the theorems, Theorem 2.85, was more elegant than Russell and Whitehead's own proof. And in an aside, Simon and Newell attempted to publish the new proof in the Journal of Symbolic Logic. And in a decision that was reminiscent of Decca Records turning down the Beatles because guitar groups were on the way out, the journal rejected it on the grounds that a new proof of an elementary mathematical theorem was not notable, overlooking the fact that one of the authors was in fact a computer program. Now, Herbert Simon went on, and thank you for bringing up Descartes. Simon went on to claim that he had invented or boldly declared that he'd solved the venerable mind-body problem posed by Descartes 3 centuries earlier. So, very quickly paraphrasing the venerable mind-body problem, it relates, and we'll come back to this a bit later on, but it relates to whether consciousness requires a non-physical mind or spirit, or whether it can be embodied purely in the physical. So Simon felt that they demonstrated that a system composed of matter can have the properties of mind, and therefore solve that age-old dilemma. Simon later admitted he'd been a tad arrogant with that particular statement. So what, the skeptics said. The machine is still ultimately just doing what you tell it to do. And that brings us to experiment 2, which is Arthur Samuel's checkers playing program. Now, it doesn't sound like much, a computer playing checkers, but it's not about the checkers. And I believe this to be one of the most significant moments in history. Why is it so? Let me quote from Samuel's paper. 2 machine learning procedures have been investigated in some detail using the game of checkers. Enough work has been done to verify the fact that a computer can be programmed so that it will learn to play a better game of checkers than can be played by the person who wrote the program. Yeah? A better game of checkers than can be played by the person who wrote the program. Importantly, this is not just because it can compute faster or search further than a human. And remember, this is just a 1959 computer, so it's not actually very powerful. So Samuel continues, furthermore, it can learn to do this in a remarkably short period of time, 8 or 10 hours of machine playing time, when given only the rules of the game, a sense of direction, and a redundant and incomplete list of parameters which are thought to have something to do with the game, but whose correct signs and relative weights are unknown and unspecified. The principles of machine learning verified by these experiments are, Samuel goes on to say, of course, applicable to many other situations. So why do I say that this is the most significant moment? Well, the reason is that the real power of AI, in my view, comes from machine learning. And historically, this experiment is considered to be the first work to disprove what had been a fundamental criticism of early AI, that computers can only do what they are told. So this program was able to do something better than its programmer, if you like. Okay, so now let's get a bit scarier with my favourite thought experiment, and that is the brain in a vat experiment, which many of you may have come across. This is a version by Hilary Putnam, but it actually is after Descartes back in 1641. And the idea of the brain in a vat experiment, again, it comes to this mind-body duality problem. So the idea is that if you think that the brain is a physical manifestation that receives inputs from the world, processes those inputs, and then acts upon the world without some other kind of, metaphysical mind or spirit or something like that, then it should be possible to take that brain, put it in a vat of life-preserving liquid, and attach electrodes to all the nerves where the sensory input comes into the brain, simulate those sensory inputs using a computer, okay? And then the question is there any distinction in the experience that that brain has from our brains operating in the real world? So the question is, do you know whether you exist now in this room or are really a brain in a vat? And if so, how? Now, a modern version of this can be found in my all-time favourite movie, which is The Matrix. Now, I don't have time to explain the movie, unfortunately, but I will quickly quote the two of the heroes, Morpheus, who is played by Lawrence Fishburne, who tracks down Neo, or the One, who is Keanu Reeves. And Neo's saying, "This isn't real." And Morpheus says, "What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain." he turns on the TV and says, "This is the world that you know, the world as it was at the end of the 20th century. It exists now only as part of a neural interactive simulation that we call the Matrix. You've been living in a dream world, Neo." So I think you can see the manifestation of the brain in a vat experiment within that film. And I'd like to finish by coming back to Descartes' original version of the brain in a vat experiment back in 1641. And Descartes poses the idea of an evil genius. This is actually a prelude to the "I think, therefore I am" that was mentioned earlier. So Descartes asks us to suppose there is an evil demon, supremely powerful and cunning, who works as hard as he can to deceive me. I shall consider that the heavens, the earth, colours, figures, sound, and all other things are naught but illusions and dreams of which this genius has availed himself in order to lay traps for my credulity. I shall consider myself as having no hands, no eyes, no flesh, no blood, nor any senses, yet falsely believing myself to possess all these things. And the question that I would like to leave you with is this. As the vat of digital communications and data retention increasingly becomes our reality, how susceptible are you to systemic manipulation? Yeah? As the vat of digital communications and data retention increasingly becomes our reality, how susceptible are you to systemic manipulation? I will leave you to think about that, although I'd like to suggest that you have about as much chance as a native Western quoll against an introduced feral cat. So I'd like to give the final word to Descartes, and while I read Descartes' quote, I'd invite you to think about some of the recent political discourse and action around data retention. Descartes says, "I may at least do what is in my power and with firm purpose avoid giving credence to any false thing or being imposed upon by this arch deceiver, however powerful and deceptive he may be. But this task is a laborious one, and insensibly a certain lassitude leads me into the course of my ordinary life. And just as a captive who sleeps enjoys an imaginary liberty, when he begins to suspect that his liberty is but a dream, fears to awaken, and conspires with these agreeable illusions that the deception may be prolonged." Thank you.